MTC EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 1. To many people, having a goal is synonymous with commitment, and commitment to a goal in turn is nearly synonymous with success. Legendary boxer Muhammad Ali once remarked, "I hated every minute of training, but I said, don't quit." Muhammad Ali. Suffer now and live the rest of your life as a champion. And there you have it, the clear sentiment that doubling down on goals is more likely to lead to success. Quitting, on the other hand, is reserved for the morally and physically weak. As you might guess, we challenge the notion that giving up, an indisputable psychological discomfort, by the way, is so awful. Blind devotion to goals has led to, among other things, gold fever, most often associated with the California gold rush, when miners expended enormous physical, emotional, and financial capital in their fruitless pursuit of riches. In fact, researcher Eva Pomerantz of the University of Illinois argues that heavy investment in a goal can erode a person's psychological quality of life by creating a spike in their anxiety. Illinois Eva Pomerantz. This is especially true when people push themselves by focusing on the potential negative impact of not achieving their goals. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 2. Our insatiable appetite for seafood, coupled with the brutal efficiency of our industrial fishing technologies, has wreaked havoc. But above all, it has been a combination of government weakness, industrial greed, and a scientific community lacking the courage to sound the alarm that has resulted in one of the greatest ecological tragedies of our time. Decision makers have routinely ignored the warning signs. The reason is that they have been frightened of upsetting the fishing lobby. As a result, they have set hopelessly unrealistic quotas, and have gone out of their way to appease industrial fishing companies. For example, in November 2008, the inappropriately named International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tuna, ICCAT, set a catch quota for bluefin tuna that is nearly 50% or higher than its own scientists advise. 200811, ICCAT, 50. Citing concern for jobs, livelihoods, and consumer interest, politicians have brought fish stocks to the brink of collapse, and by their failure, they threaten the very people in whose interests they claim to be acting. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 3. We live in times when speed of reaction often takes precedence over slower and more cautious assessments. As we become more attuned to real-time events and media, we inevitably end up placing more trust in sensation and emotion than in evidence. Knowledge becomes more valued for its speed and impact than for its cold objectivity, and emotive falsehood often travels faster than fact. In situations of physical danger, where time is of the essence, rapid reaction makes sense. But the influence of real-time data now extends well beyond matters of security. News, financial markets, friendships, and work engage us in a constant flow of information, making it harder to stand back and construct a more reliable portrait of any of them. The threat lurking in this is that otherwise peaceful situations can come to feel dangerous, until eventually they really are. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 4. Quite often, a party seeking to show statistical significance combines data from different sources to create larger numbers, and hence greater significance for a given disparity. Conversely, a party seeking to avoid finding significance disaggregates data insofar as possible. In a discrimination suit brought by female faculty members of a medical school, plaintiffs aggregated faculty data over several years, while the school based its statistics on separate departments and separate years. The argument for disaggregation is that pooled data may be quite misleading. A well-known study showed that at the University of California at Berkeley, female applicants for graduate admissions were accepted at a lower rate than male applicants. When the figures were broken down by department, however, it appeared that in most departments the women's acceptance rate was higher than the men's. The reason for the reversal was that women applied in greater numbers to departments with lower acceptance rates than to the departments to which men predominantly applied. The departments were therefore variables that confounded the association between sex and admission. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS, 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 5-7. Professor Povzner taught a course at the Military Academy for Engineers. Povzner Military Academy for Engineers. He walked into a class one day, ready to start his lecture with a routine spiel about Russian primacy in mathematics, and then settled down to a serious session of really teaching mathematics. But to his alarm, the minute he got up in front of the class he saw that among the audience was a general, the chief of the academy. Academy. Povzner pulled up short and decided that he had better devote the whole lecture to the subject of early Russian genius in mathematics. Povzner. Luckily, he was a very talented man, good at thinking on his feet, so on the spur of the moment he invented a wonderful lecture on Russian mathematics in the 12th century. 1-2. He engaged in flights of fancy for the entire hour, stopping only 5 minutes before the end to ask, as was customary, "Are there any questions?" 5. Povzner saw that one of the students had raised his hand. Povzner. The student said, "This is so interesting, about medieval Russian mathematics. Could you tell us, please, where we could get more information about it, what the reference books would be? I would like to learn more." Having no time to think, the professor immediately answered. "Well, that's impossible. All the archives were burned during the Tatar invasion." Tatar. When the class was over, the general got up slowly from his seat. Then he came up to the lecturer and said, "So, Professor, all the archives were burned?" Only then did poor Povzner realize what he had said. Povzner. The unspoken question hung in the air. If all the evidence of Russian primacy in this science was burned, how in the world did the professor himself know the history of pre-invasion mathematics? He was ready to panic when, unexpectedly, the general smiled at him sympathetically, turned around, and left. This high-ranking commander was a clever ancient person, otherwise Professor Povzner would have been in deep trouble. Povzner. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS, 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 8. When romantic partners lie to each other, they do so relatively often by concealing information. There are several reasons as to why liars prefer concealments. First of all, they are difficult to detect. Once information is provided, lie detectors can verify the accuracy of this information by searching for further evidence that supports or contradicts it. In the case of concealments, however, no information is given. Moreover, concealing information is relatively easy. When telling an outright lie or when exaggerating, a liar should invent a story that sounds plausible, whereas nothing needs to be invented when concealing information. Another problem with telling an outright lie or exaggerating is that liars need to remember the details they provided in case the topic of the lie comes up on subsequent occasions. However, they don't need to remember anything if they don't provide information. Concealment. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS, 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 9. Control of the crime scene is obviously important. This can be done by establishing the boundary of the scene, be it a location, item, or person, and protecting it. The establishment of a cordon at a major crime scene, marking it with incident tape and protecting it with police officers, is the common practice. The same principles apply if the examination is that of a person, a suspect, victim, or witness, recovered vehicle, or any other item. The recording of the names of those who enter and leave the defined scene, or come into contact with it, and at what time maintains the integrity of the scene management process. The scene or investigation also extends to persons removed from the scene and those who may be potentially connected with it. The availability of trained crime scene investigators to examine such scenes may not always be adequate. It is a long-established principle that all areas such as scene, victim, vehicle, and suspect should be dealt with by separate scene investigators. But at some stage, most often in the laboratory, items will be examined and compared by the same scientist, where systems are also required to ensure that there is no contamination. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 10. In a study, 77 undergraduate students were interviewed. 77. During these interviews, they were presented with various events, e.g., falling on their head, getting a painful wound, or being sent to a hospital emergency room. They were told that, according to their parents, these events had occurred in their childhood. The interviewer gave further details about the events supposedly given by the parents. Unknown to the interviewees, the events were invented by the researchers and had never happened to the participants according to their parents. Guided imagery instructions were given to the participants to help them generate images for the false event, e.g., visualize what it might have been like and the memory will probably come back to you. Results indicated that 26% of students recovered a complete memory for the false event, and another 30% recalled aspects of the false experience. 2630. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 11. Noise is often thought to affect performance, as anyone who has tried to concentrate in a noisy environment can attest. High-intensity noise clearly is related to a generalized stress response. However, the effects of noise on performance are far from clear-cut. In general, task performance is only impaired at very high noise intensities. Performance deficits are particularly obvious for difficult or demanding tasks. Simple or routine tasks, on the other hand, are typically not affected by noise, and sometimes noise increases performance on simple tasks. This enhancement effect probably occurs because the noise acts as a stressor, raising the person's arousal level and therefore overcoming the boredom associated with the task. Unfortunately, most of the evidence on task performance under noisy conditions comes from laboratory experiments. Based on the research conducted so far, we cannot assess whether the findings of lab research on noise will generalize to less controlled conditions in real work settings. MTC. Good job. Let's start. MTC. EBS 202, Chapter 11. Exercise 12-14. I recently had the privilege of listening to Robert Cooper, author of Executive EQ, address an auditorium of 900 people. Executive EO Robert Cooper 900. The story he told in the first 10 minutes of his speech demonstrated his authenticity. 10. He chose to tell us who he was by telling a story about his grandfather, who died when Robert was 16 years old. Robert. His father's father had 4 major heart attacks before he eventually died from the 5th. During that time, he had taken great care to assist in Robert's development as a young man. Robert. He invested long talks and personal time with him. We could see the love Robert felt for his grandfather when he used words to help us see this man as he saw him back then. Robert. He said, if you could measure intelligence in the quality of intensity in a man's eyes, he surely must have been a genius. He described the decline in his grandfather's health and how after each major heart attack his grandfather would call Robert to his side, burning to share his latest near-death insight. Robert. Robert had us leaning forward in our seats, as he recounted his grandfather's words. I've been thinking about what is most important in life, and I've concluded that the most important thing in life is Robert. We wanted to share the insights of this great man. By the fourth time he had us laughing at the old man's revisions and Robert's adolescent fear that he was going to be tested on remembering what the last heart attack's most important thing in life was. Robert. As we continued to smile, he told us about his grandfather's last revision. My grandfather said to me, "Give the world the best you have and the best will come back to you." I have asked myself, what if every day I had refused to accept yesterday's definition of my best? So much would have come back to me, to your father, to you. But now it won't, because I didn't. It is too late for me. But it's not too late for you. I held my breath along with everyone there at the power of a man's regret at the end of his life. It is too late for me. Our common humanity means that we, too, will die. Every person in that audience had a flicker of awareness toward our own deaths and potential regrets. He didn't pull any punches with this story, but Robert glowed with the intensity of total authenticity, and his integrity gave him the right to tell such a powerful story. Robert. MTC. Good job.